so I get out and I get in an Uber to go back across town, back to the movie show. And it's the worst Uber, 1-star Uber you can imagine. Dust coming off the back seat of the Corolla. The driver's seat is actually in the back seat. He's just a giant man. And, and I'm like, ugh. So I'm like texting, I'm in my phone. The driver says, "What's going on here?" And I said, "Well, it's kind of like this, like Easter story, kind of thing about Christ and stuff." And he's like, "Oh." He gives a couple minutes and he goes, "So what is the Lord telling you right now?"
No.
I'm just like, "Oh, boy." And so I was like, "Well, I've been asking him, what do you know about this that you want me to know, and what do you want me to do?" He says, "I think your question is not what do you want me to do, but it's who do you want me to be?" And so,
oh my gosh.
I'm just like, I totally expected when we pulled in backstage the other place, I'd get out of the car and it would just
Yeah.
totally disappear. But from that, it was just such an affirmation of, no, I, the Lord, am doing something, and I'm inviting you to do it.
Welcome back to Make It Share It, the podcast where creativity meets courage. Our guest today is Greg, and is it Lathe? I just realized Lathe, yep. Greg Lathe. So Greg Lathe comes to us from a musical background in terms of creativity, which we'll talk more about. And just love his story, the gospel narrative that's embedded in his story. And so we'll talk more about that with him. Then normally we do a turning point of just kind of, maybe something in your past that really changed the way you live, think, and relate in the world. But I kind of want to take this a little different direction and explain how you ended up on the show. And then maybe just kind of use that as a jumping off point for your story. And you can take that, that launch wherever you want to, however far back you want to go. But so Greg listened to our episode with Jamie Winship and then reached out to us and was just sharing encouragement about what the episode meant to him, as a few of you have done. And then Greg and I just jumped on a call just to talk about life and creativity and our stories. And it's like, man, I'd love for you to share how you got here, right? To where he is today and some of the things that he and his wife are doing in the future, what's on their hearts. So, with that, like, you can go as far back as you want, but like, just kind of take us into the journey that you're on in music and the gospel and all of that from wherever you really want to start. And then we'll just kind of jump in with questions as we go.
Yeah. Feel free to interrupt because I can get on a roll and spend the whole time just yakking about it all, but that is how I found you guys. Was the Jamie Winship episode. I'm kind of a Jamie junkie, and so every time he pops up on YouTube somewhere, it pops into my feed. And then after listening to that podcast that he did with you all, I went back, and within the next 7 to 8 days, I listened to all 14 or 15 that were in there, just straight binge of them. And I got so much out of it that was so timely for me for reasons that, we'll talk about here. But the, as I'm talking to Jamie about identity, that has been a real turning point for me for a number of reasons. So I came out of college and was a middle school music teacher for 5 years and was taught orchestra at the middle school, and then 15 years as a music pastor at a church, large church in the Milwaukee area. And then after that, I was 3 years in an inner city orchestra teacher at an inner city school. And that was absolutely horrible. And just from the sense of there was preciousness now looking back afterwards, but I was getting beat up. I was getting, it was just my first day of middle school orchestra. I had 52 kids in the 8th grade orchestra, and I had one violin for them to all share. Oh. And it was just, it was a real difficult, you can imagine that scenario. And then following that, I came on staff with a national concert promoter in the Christian music genre. And I've been with them for 8 years, but kind of I had gone through so many different things of diving into creativity throughout life as a music pastor. I was writing musicals, staging them, doing things that were successful. But I'd always had this dream thing that the Lord had put in my heart when I was young, just this vision for this production. And I kind of would tiptoe close to it, but I would always just shy away for fear of failure or whatever. And when I, towards the end of the time working at the church it actually ended very, very badly. I had gone through failure, divorce, I just thought I had ruined my life. And I thought from that point on, the door was slammed shut. It was closed. It took me 2 years before I could even walk into a church because I was so ashamed of the path. And so I just thought I was dead. And so then I went from there into that inner city environment. And then you talk about, there was no respect. There was, it was just awful. They had my name carved on the door with, derogatory things, written about it. I mean, just how horrible that all felt. And at the time I was just at the bottom. And then I was remarried and joined the company my wife worked for and got involved in the, touring with, Christian bands and different things. And it was, even in that time, became more of the business side. It wasn't the creative side. And still had this kind of sense of, even though it was a great environment to be in these big arenas, doing big shows and having a great time, there was this element of self-loathing that you're still a failure. That's your definition. And I had gone to, in May of 22, I went to a men's retreat. And part of that men's retreat was part of a group called Braveheart and led by Michael Warden. And we met up in Breckenridge, Colorado. So it's a beautiful place to revive. And part of that was stripping down and getting to your identity, your true identity. And as part of that, I began to write out an identity statement. And this is who I am. And the first part of my identity statement is I am Greg. And just getting that first part out of it was so hard for me because I did not realize how much I had become to just loathe Greg, because Greg to me was a definition of failure. And I remember, one of my favorite things in the world to do is conduct an orchestra. And I remember one of the guys, as part of this process, as guys are working on their identity and developing, he told me, he says, I can picture you conducting an orchestra again. And it made me just angry. Like, how dare you put that in front of me as a potential for something good, because I'm awful, But then, as from your experience with Jamie and stuff, it was just the reviewing of the lies, the things that aren't true. And it turns out that God had an identity for me. And in restoring that was the start of a turning point. And then in Thanksgiving of that same year, 2 years ago, my friend sent me an email I'd been a part of the church ministry years ago, 25 years ago or so, and 20 years ago. And he said, I've just been thinking about you. And he spoke to the real me. He says, you need to get back to doing what you do and creating. And it really woke me up. And I just began to experience that living according to my identity. And I could share that whole statement if you want to hear it. But through that, I found out this dream is alive. And just the Lord just has so many different ways of putting a stick in the nest, so to speak, to wake you up to it. While I was and specifically, what I guess I'll just kind of paint the picture of what I'm walking towards is this. I call it experience redemption. And it's a full stage orchestral concert with the storyline from beginning to end that just involves mixed media. It's mixed media, drama, art, all of these things that just is a full stage production is the big dream. And over a year ago, I had actually shared with my employer, I'm like, I feel like the Lord is pulling my heart towards this. And so it was just kind of feeling that way, just did not know the timing or whatever. And then way back when I was teaching at the middle school, I had been asked to lead the Black History program. And as you can imagine, I'd been a suburban school teacher, suburban music pastor. Now I'm here in charge of the Black History program for the school. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. And so I pulled in a friend who he wasn't a friend at the time. He was a substitute teacher. And I'm like, hey, you want to be a part of this? I heard you do the moonwalk really well. And, you want to show the kids. And it did. It turned out to be, he's like, all right, I'll try it. I haven't done that kind of thing before. And so he did. And it turned out great. Well, then him and I collaborated the next year on this 5-minute piece on Frederick Douglass. And it turned out great. It was awesome. And in fact, somebody had seen it and then invited the kids to perform it at the Kennedy Center in 2018. And so we took the kids out and performed it as a part of this thing at the Kennedy Center, and it went great. It was one of the highlights of my life, is seeing kids who had never been out of their zip code performing on stage at the Kennedy Center to a standing ovation. And that was awesome.
Amazing.
Well, feeling the stirring in my heart, just not knowing the timing of different things. This spring, my friend is now overseeing the arts programs for all of Milwaukee public schools, and he is actually he had the kids perform it again this year, and they again got invited out to the Kennedy Center. Well, then some different individuals from Broadway Junior had seen it, and other organizations, and they said, would you guys be interested in turning this into a full-length musical? And they said, and yeah. So they had us out, and we spent a week at the Kennedy Center this summer. They brought in actors for us to work with, finished composing like 20 songs, and are now working on premiering that this spring here in Milwaukee. And the timing of all of that, combined with where I'm at in the workspace, it's like, I think this might be the time. This might be the time to move forward in that direction. And I mean, there's just so many different details in this I could go on to. I don't know what really resonates with you all, but the Lord dealt with my wife's heart around the same time, and the stirring for that, the Frederick musical, the Redemption Project. I just feel like we just felt the Lord just realizing this is the time. And so we talked to our employer, leaving on good terms, and just supported this. But it's for the first time in my life, I feel like I am fully, lack of a better word, naked, facing, there's nothing but just walking towards this whiteboard of a dream and putting this together, and just really excited about what God wants to do. And through all of this and developing the identity statement and all that, it's just been so restorative, of realizing I don't have to be somebody else to do this. The Lord is just asking me to be me. And the things that you guys have talked about in your past podcasts, I've just checked off the list. Craig Cunningham talking about that masterpiece syndrome. The Nathan Knuckles, I just got so much out of sharing the things that he shared there. Coop, when you were talking about chasing the third thing, as I'm walking into the unknown, even when it comes to finances, and all these things, just knowing, all right, here goes. So in the process of jumping out of the plane.
Man, this is awesome. One thing I would say that might be an interesting conversation to have, this has come up in a few things for me. One was through John Mayer, like an interview with John Mayer. One was Rainn Wilson from The Office. People that had pursued something for a really long time, like music or acting, and then realizing not just success, but success being, oh, I get to do this for a living now. Like, never thought I'd be here. I've been trying this since I was 13. I'm 25 and I might be able to eke out a living, was like John Mayer. And he was like, then something crazy happens. If you don't set some kind of reasonable expectation for just you, and like you and your wife, or you and the partners making this thing, you might not ever feel like it's a success and be able to move on to whatever's next, even if it's not another musical. So like, and Rainn Wilson, he was like, I was on the biggest TV show at the time. I was considered the funniest part of that TV show and making hundreds of thousands of dollars per episode. But I wasn't getting the call to be a lead in movies. And so I let that's what I really wanted to be successful, or that's what I thought. And it ruined his time on The Office. And he didn't enjoy it. He thought he was a failure during his Office run. Wow. And John Mayer was like, after my second album, well, it did a little bit less than the first album. Does that make that album less successful, less meaningful? He was like, it really messed him up. So he was like, okay, so I set this new bar. If I can sell 100,000 copies of anything I do, which basically just means my record label and the people in my life will allow me to make another record. If I can just hit that bar, I'm going to have dinner with my family. Or my friends, we're going to celebrate it and move on to the next thing. Because he's like, you could sell 10 million copies and then a news article will pop up the next day that Beyonce has sold 22 million. And now you're all of a sudden not just in second place, you're in a deep 50th and you're like, oh, I guess I wasn't that good. And I'm like, no. You just sold 10 million copies, brother. Like, are you insane? And if you set that, hey, I was trying to sell 100,000 every time just so someone will let me make a new one, you can celebrate it. And I found that exercise to be so freeing into doing the next thing. And so it's like, while you're building this and while it's about to release and while you're getting to the end, that's I think, a really helpful conversation to kick around before it's even been released and shared to the world, to go, hey, has this process just been a success? Yep. Regardless of how this is received, if we get to do 50 shows, if this thing runs for 20 years, what we've learned just making this is absolutely worth its weight in gold. Yeah. Because if you don't, I feel like if you struggle with the masterpiece syndrome, if you struggle with imposter syndrome, I think that's how it creeps back in. Yeah. No matter what you accomplish wasn't enough. And that is like an impossible place. Yes.
You're miserable.
Yeah.
And you lose the love of the gift you've been given.
There's that element of the invisible chains that are holding you back from doing things. And like you talked about, just in that, even that comparison of results, that third thing, comparing how it's received and how successful it is. Like even in last episode when you talked about the group, it's like cutting that chain off just frees the soul to be like, I don't have to worry about that. I just focus on the create. That's this lifetime obedience being the masterpiece is the thing. You know, I was actually just meditating on that this weekend. We are all driving on roads that we did not pave. Somebody else cleared the path, somebody else chopped down the trees, somebody else laid the groundwork, somebody else, did that. And we don't know whether we're the one to drive on the pavement or we're the one to clear the trees. But the thing is when we create, it can clear the trees for somebody else. Interesting thing that's happened is the power of vulnerability in this. And I've seen it in this podcast as well, is when you are vulnerable and even just sharing the dream, like even to have, not even just sharing the art, but just sharing the dream of creating the art, you're inviting others to be vulnerable as well. And to me, that has proven for me to be such a win, is to hear people, you're saying that, and it reminds me that I need to do this. And I feel, and it used to be, and even in this, as I've been talking already, I've talked about it. This was my dream, my hope, the thing that I wanted to do, and all this thing. It's totally shifted to God is doing something. He's inviting me to it and inviting me to tap into his creativity on this. That's also very freeing. Another chain falls off and holding me back. Now he's doing this. So I can't screw it up because it's his work. It just gives that freedom.
Yeah. I do like the storyteller part of me. Is I'm thinking about somebody listening to this, and unfortunately, I could think a lot of people that may be in that place of feeling like a failure. Unfortunately, I can think of a lot of people who have been in ministry, vocational ministry, who have a similar story and could be listening to something like this and be still stuck in that space. So, like going back to that, I mean, there's a little mini documentary of you in the school in Milwaukee, inner city. I mean, you're getting attacked physically, verbally. I mean, the accuser, and then those that are playing that role, unwittingly being an accuser of your identity. I mean, that's just a very low space. And then in the midst of that darkness, to have this collaboration come from an unlikely partner, these two guys from different backgrounds, then with these students to create something that ends up being Broadway Junior, at least for now, maybe bigger, is just ridiculous. Like, that's an amazing story. So take me back to that. I'd love to hear a little more about the gentleman that you connected with. Like, what was his story? What was he doing? Because it's like you guys became very much, again, the unlikely duo. to create this musical about the life of Frederick Douglass. So yeah, take us back to that.
Well, my friend Jaron is one of the most talented people I've ever met. And he's always just kind of home produced his own music and written his own songs, but was just a kind of a long-term substitute teacher. And as he, was pulled into the creativity, like the school that we were teaching in is actually an art school that hadn't done musicals in years. Like the auditorium had pretty much been chained up, not being used and all this stuff. And so while I was there, I got some more instruments, wrote a grant. They refurbished some of the auditorium thing. As it came time that I felt like I needed to leave that space because it was so unhealthy, I'm like, Jay, you got to step in. Like, we just started doing the Lion King with the kids, and I'm like, you got to step in and do this. And he's like, he far exceeded his connection with these kids, having, just more that he can relate to than I could, himself being, African American, his and relating to the stories of the kids, their perspectives, and just having that, being able to collaborate with him has been so beautiful. And even though, in the sense that our approach to everything that we want to do, and him being a Christ follower as well, is we want everything to tell the story of light, life, and love, and not let any storyline be hijacked, for other means. And that in itself is kind of a counter-cultural current swim, in some different things. And it's created some very open, vulnerable conversations with me as a guy who grew up in northern Minnesota, just, I don't get it. I don't understand. And being able to just be vulnerable about these things and hammer that out has sealed our friendship so much deeper in our differences, in our diversity, than it could have been if we were just the same, and that means that my idea, that works good for me just doesn't work, and I have to be able to take that feedback and let that become something that, just kind of melts and solders it together in a stronger way. Then, it's really putting your insecurities out there and fears. A lot of the division that we face in our country and in any situation is because of fear. And so the only way to tackle that is to confess it, be vulnerable about it, and let the healing happen.
And from the story before, there's other questions. So you guys, was it that you put this performance up on YouTube? And that's how did it get to people where it's all of a sudden at the Kennedy Center?
So we, there was a Turnaround Arts program, is what it's a national program. And our school had joined to be part of that national program of Turnaround Arts. There was 3 schools in our area. And so they're the regional leader for Turnaround Arts had visited, saw a video of it and that kind of thing. And that created there were other schools from around the country that were also invited to be a part of this. And so, but even in that, it was different in its presentation, and being a lot of different schools that were invited, they were a little bit nervous about the style coming from our school and the way that we were presenting this topic to kids, that they were trying to put a lot of restrictions on at the beginning, and we're like, no, let's stay true to this. And it ended up just blowing the doors off of it. It was really cool.
Okay, so wait, so what's the style?
So it's almost in the style of Hamilton, in that, but Frederick Douglass, I don't know how well you guys are with the history. I've learned a lot through this process, but was a slave boy who didn't even know what year he was born. There's no record of that. Didn't even know the year he was born. So somebody, you talk about an identity that's lost. And he ends up being friends with Abraham Lincoln, during this time, and probably heard of Lincoln Douglas debates and, these kind of things, and ends up even interacting with Susan B. Anthony and all of these things that happen because, and it's the true part of the story. And this isn't in the script for the context we're using it, but Frederick Douglass became a Christian. And he says, the Lord gave me a love for everyone, including my slave owners. And it's a story of light, life, and love. And it's a story of finding true identity. of trying who you really are versus what everything outside of you says you are. And just focusing on that truth and keeping the storyline to that truth is just an incredible opportunity to show something different. And so some of that, I think that like the nervousness about inviting us out that initial time was just because there was a real potential for more of a divisive conversation to be brought into it. But the fact, the way that, that we just talked about, knowledge is power and you can't live without it. And, the importance of education and importance of, of just pursuing truth, was what really resonated.
I mean, an encouragement I'm hearing too for people, a lot of people you hear, I don't know what syndrome this would be called, but it's like preparation syndrome. It's like, I can't do it until I have my master's, or I can't work at a church until I go to seminary, or, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like I have to learn X amount and gain X amount and have the right gear or skins on the wall before I can do the thing that I feel like I'm called to do, which is a weird thing. But like, this is a school, which I don't even want to go down this rabbit trail of a public art school who has one violin and doesn't open and the auditorium hasn't been used. That's broken, which I think we all feel and know, but it's like, that's insane. So it's like a resourceless place. And then you got a guy who's been there a year or two teaming up with a long-term sub to create this thing. So if you look at it from like just zooming out, it's like, we didn't study this. We didn't know each other. This wasn't on our job description. We had no tools. You know what I mean? Like, it's a freeing thing to me if you're sitting at home gathering skins on the wall and trying to get enough things that you need before you can start.
Yep.
It might not ever happen.
Yeah.
So just get after it. And you don't need any of those things that it's probably like going back to fear. You don't have to start until you feel like you've got enough experience to do it. And I just don't think you'll ever get to that place. And the Lord can do crazy things through a guy meeting a long-term sub at a place with one violin. That to me, I love. That's fantastic.
And I do want to go back to the failure part too, but in the context of that, I was at the lowest of low time of my life. I was borderline suicidal. There was one assistant principal who just would continually tell me, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. Had he not told me that, I don't know if I could have made it. But there was this one day that a kid would not sit down, and he was a 6th grade drug dealer. I mean, he was just like, he would not sit down. And I got up next to him and I'm like, you need to sit down. I'm kind of losing my cool. And he said, step off, baby Hippo. That was the thing that he that he called me. And I'm like, it offended me. It hurt my feelings. I told my wife, called her, and I told my wife, and I said, call me baby Hippo. Well, she thought it was so cute that she started calling me that. Well, then that actually became, when I started touring with the groups we went on tour with, it became my radio handle, was baby Hippo. Awesome. I have this little mascot here that is, it turns out they're the most dangerous creatures, known as, and it turned into an identity that was intended to be false, or, that wasn't derogatory. I can stand to lose a few pounds, that I was feeling insecure about. Well, I ended up, Toby Mac does this golf camp, and he invited me to be the speaker and at the golf camp. And I spoke about being called baby Hippo, and I spoke about identity to these kids. Well, a kid in Florida found this at a garage sale and found my address and sent it to me to tag on to that. That's my Instagram handle, is baby Hippogram. I mean, it's just become a thing out of a season that was the worst. It was awful. And you just don't know what seed takes root during that time.
It makes me think of this story in Numbers, because I wrote a Bible study on Numbers because I'm crazy. And it's where Balaam is tasked to curse the people of God, but then he ends up blessing them. And so even just that, out of that little 6th grade drug dealer's mouth, he didn't know, he felt like he was cursing you, but actually that curse turning into this blessing, that you're dangerous and look out for baby Hippo.
It's so fun.
You never know what he's going to do. I also love the community aspect of your story with even the principal just seeing that you're struggling and hurting and speaking those words if it's not your fault. And then the community aspect of your Jay is what you call him, Jaron, Jay, Jaron. That's a Jaron. Even I'm curious, were you kind of in that place? Had you gone to that retreat when you connected with him already? You hadn't yet. Okay.
No. So I started teaching there in 2014, and I left there in January of 2017.
Okay.
And it was that year that we ended up taking the kids to Washington, D.C., or 2018. It was the following year, actually. They took our piece from the year before. Yeah, so it was this was all pre-restoration stuff that turned it out to be the building materials for that. And it's,
after.
Part of my identity is one phrase from my identity statement is connector of dots. And it has everything to do from scoring music, connecting the dots of music notes, to just connecting people. And I've been that's just always been part of the story, is just being able to connect with people who pull us together, like Jay. But even in that time, it was like I was still going through that you mentioned talking about that failure, just to speak to people who've gone through that experience with God, to just feel like that's it. That's the door is slammed shut. I was a music director. I played piano. It took me 11 years from the time I played piano in church to play for another worship service. 11 years before I could do it again, just because I just felt so awful. But the whole time, I'd always heard that if you're in sin, God can't talk to you, because sin separates. God won't talk to you in sin. And it's not true. I heard him all the time, and he was saying, I just want to be with you. I just want to be with you. But there were so many times I was just, I can't hear it, because I'm, and so then you try too hard in the wrong direction, or you try to strive to make up for these things. And until you really listen to him and let him restore your soul, really remind you of who you are. Isaiah 43, I have redeemed you. I called you by name. And so this whole redemption story is not just a stage show for Frederick Douglass or for the redemption project that we're working on. It's our story, it's my wife and my story of falling hard, disappointing everyone, failing. And it's like, turns out that's his business. That's what he does, is restore.
That's right. It's so good.
Yeah, and I love that it's not, you were a believer, then you were in vocational ministry, right? You're on stage and you're leading. And then there's, this really hard time that comes after that. So for people that are listening, that's your story. And because I feel like that's where it really can seem like the door shut. It's like one thing if, I'm not a believer and live in whatever, and then I become a Christian, but it's these stories to me that are very real, more prodigal stories of like, I have everything, I'm in at home with dad who has everything, is blessing me. And I'm like, I want to still go a different route and make some different decisions. And then he's still right there running after you, to clothe you with the finest clothes and put the greatest ring on you and do the biggest celebration. So, man, it's encouraging to hear that. Hear you share that.
I'm so grateful, for those who have been around. The guy, Michael Warden, the guy who led the Brave Heart Retreat and has continued to just talk us through all of this. And I've kind of come to the realization that for much of my life, I talk about how for the first time, just facing this dream, walking into it, facing the freedom of actually just being free to create, which just feels so exposed that I almost want to go get a job at Walmart as a fig leaf, so to speak, just so I can solve somebody else's problem, which will not put me in that vulnerable state of, facing my business. Even doing the good work. I think this was a Jamie question. I don't know if it was in his book or just one of the things I heard him say before is one of the questions you have to, Lord, is what am I doing for you that you did not ask me to do? And so many of the things I think I've done in my life have been for the Lord, but were just actually me going, nah, 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 to the big things that he was calling me to do.
Yeah. One other story. So I love these stories is, would you mind sharing the one, I think when you guys were touring and you were kind of telling me about this dream, the Redemption Project and everything, Son to Your Heart, and going back into the green room and all of those things, if if you're willing to share that.
Sure. So it was not until 2 years ago that I was really even talking, other than my wife and I are sharing this dream now, and it's just kind of as it's building, but I didn't even know how to describe what I was talking about, like in this experience redemption thing that I want to do. And we had just read out loud, gone through the whole book, Living Fearless, together. And so one of the things was, okay, I'm going to start telling people about this, just start sharing about this. But we're going through the question that, Lord, what do you know about this that you want me to know? One of the question that we should be asking in every situation that we face. And we were in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We were on tour, and we were walking back. Stacy, my wife, and I, we'd gone on a walk, and we're coming back. I'm like, I'm going to put this into practical use today. So we walked into the backstage door of the BOK Center in Tulsa, and I said, I'm going to go to the green room. I think the Lord wants me to go to the green room. And so I walked into the green room, and there's these two gentlemen sitting down. We were on a Toby Mac tour. It was one of Toby's background singers, and there's another guy I'd never seen before, a stranger. And I said, Lord, what do you know about this that you want me to know? And like, Lord says, sit down. And so, all right, I'm going to sit down. And, for people that are like, the Lord says, how did that sound? Or what did that, it's just that feeling inside that it's the thought that is not your own, but it's an impulse. It's that, that's how he speaks to me kind of through that. I feel like I'm having a conversation with the Lord that's just pretty straightforward. And so George, the guy who is a background singer for Toby at the time, he looks over at me and he says, so Greg, what's your big dream? Wow. And I'm like, of all questions, just to be, and there's a guy I don't even know, and so I'm like, well, guys, I don't know how to explain this. And the only context I really had, and even mapping it out in my own mind, I was like, well, I guess it's kind of like a traveling Easter musical. And they both started laughing. Like, that's the worst. Like, if I could not have anything, it would be that these two guys are laughing, and then they're like, you're kidding, right? And I'm like, nah, I know it's dumb. It's like, no. Well, you know about the Thorn, right? And the Thorn is this traveling production. It's a dramatized passion play, really. It's Cirque du Soleil meets the Jesus story. And he says, well, this is Pedro. Pedro is the speaker for the Thorn that's across town in Tulsa at that time. And it's like 6:30, and that show starts at 7. And he's like, yeah, I'm about to go back over there. And he's like, I thought you were kidding, because that's going on across town right now. And I'm like, what? And the Lord says, go with him. So I dropped all my responsibilities I was doing on the tour. I got in the car with a guy I'd never met before. We drove across town. He's like, as we're driving there, he's like, I only got one pass. He says, I don't know if they're going to let us in the back door, because I only got this one pass. We'll try. So we pull up and we walk to the back door, and the security guard is sound asleep, just snoring. And so we both just walk in just fine. I shouldn't say that, but maybe delete that part just so we know. It was very secure. And so he has to go right up the stage. So he just hands me his pass. And he says that I'm going to leave and go back and watch the Toby show when my part's done, but you watch the whole thing. And so I watched the whole thing. And in the middle of it, somebody comes up to me and says, hey, the owner of this wants to talk to you. And so I got to meet John Bolin, who had written this script, and it started it as a church musical. And now it's selling out theaters around the country, and became good friends. He was just in Milwaukee and met with him. But at this time, it's just like, the whole thing was the Lord just showing me, you talk about this as if it's impossible. Somebody's already doing it. You're so narrow in your thinking. The Lord is not condemning that way, but he's like, here's somebody who's doing it. This can be done. And so I had a great conversation with him, watched the rest of this thing. And the whole time I'm just like, man, this is just insane. And so I get out and I get in an Uber to go back across town, back to the Toby show. And it's the worst Uber, 1-star Uber you can imagine. dust coming off the back seat of the Corolla. The driver's seat is actually in the back seat. He's just a giant man. And, and I'm like, ugh. So I'm like texting, I'm in my phone. Driver says, what's going on here? And I was like, well, it's kind of like this, like an Easter story, kind of thing about Christ and stuff. And he was like, oh, give it a couple minutes. And he goes, so what is the Lord telling you right now?
No.
I'm just like, oh boy. And so I was like, well, I've been asking him, what do you know about this that you want me to know, and what do you want me to do? He says, I think your question is not what do you want me to do, but it's who do you want me to be? And so
Oh my gosh.
I'm just like, I totally expected when we pulled in backstage the other place, I'd get out of the car and it would just
Yeah.
totally disappear. But from that, it was just such an affirmation of, no, I, the Lord, am doing something, and I'm inviting you to do it, and if this would be the time, I guess, to put in my full identity statement that I've been, worked on over the course of time through, your identity is received from the Lord and worked out in community with others. And I'm Greg. I'm a smiling leader encourager, a maestro that intentionally sees and hears the music in every moment and passionately pursues harmony and resonance. I'm a powerful, intense fire that attracts others and draws them together and ignites and invites them to walk in their true identity. I am a man. I am a connector of dots. I know that's a long version.
I love that.
But
I like hearing a longer version.
That just defines itself. I don't have to worry about what to do because I just have to be me. And when I'm me, everything else will follow.
So good.
So good.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yes.
It's funny too that I also hear that angels sent to help us always look like 1-star Uber drivers. I think that is dead on
I think so too.
and 100% accurate. And so don't sleep when you find yourself in that situation. Kind of keep an eye open, like, this is how this
Yep.
works.
Well, like in A Wonderful Life, what's his name? He was a pretty, what's his name?
Yes.
What's the angel's name?
Oh, gosh.
It's a Wonderful Life. What is it? Clarence.
Thank you, Greg.
Yeah,
You
he
saved
was
us.
the equivalent of a 1-star Uber driver.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I would say that might encourage others is like without getting too much into the technical side, I can guarantee if you're conducting orchestras, teaching orchestra class, playing piano on tour, you're a classically trained musician and now you're pursuing and doing musical things. I didn't make it past 3rd grade piano lessons. And I can't tell you, that was actually one of my biggest issues at church as a bass player. Was a few of the guys, we were close to University of North Texas. A lot of the guys there had their masters in performing bass guitar, like as one of the first people I met at church. And I'm just like, oh, good grief. And I remember the first time they started breaking out just the Nashville number system. Hey, we're going to go to the 6 and then we're going to go to the 4. And I was like, huh? Like fret? What are you talking about? And I was the king of, you just got to play it and I'll hear it and I'll do it. Or I'll hear it and go, oh, that's just like that Guns N' Roses song. They're acting like they did something cool here. I learned that in 1988. And so it's just funny too. That's like, if you love it, you can do it, and you'll find your way, and your own way of doing it will make you unique, and your background makes you unique, and mine makes me unique in how I approach musical things. But we didn't have to be, even within music, our paths could be completely different. And I love that too. And I also kind of think when it comes to community and partnerships, find a guy who doesn't look like your path and really crazy cool stuff can happen.
Yeah.
So it's like team up with the guy who's classically trained because you don't know any of that stuff. And the two of you together are going to make something really different because you don't. Yeah. I don't know. I love that idea too.
I haven't had the, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Greg.
You.
Well, I was just going to say, I haven't had the 1-star Uber driver experience, but part of your story did resonate with me. I've had a little dream that Kent's kind of helping me on that I'd kind of carried around. And there's a time where I just kind of had to put it in my back pocket because it wasn't the right time. And then I felt like the Lord was like, okay, bring that dream out. And I tried to work different angles on it and it just wasn't happening. until I was just, I think I'd listened to Jamie. I'd listened to a John Eldridge podcast too about what it looks like to work with God, not for him. And I remember just praying, Lord, what does this look like? And I mean, the next day, I took homemade salsa over to my neighbor. And that was a connection that's got the ball rolling on this dream becoming a reality. And it really was that me surrendering and saying, Lord, what do you want to do? I don't want to do this for you. I need you to do it. And you just show me what's the next step. And he seems to be very consistent at showing us the next step if we'll humble ourselves and ask him and look and listen.
And I go through a book now. I see it in Sullivan, but it's who now.
Yes. Who, uh-huh.
And it is all about that connection with somebody else. Like, I almost look like when you're talking about, not having the education that those around you have, sometimes we look at that, we actually use that as an excuse not to be wholehearted and not to totally put ourselves in with both feet, to just say, hey, I'm here to play with the big dogs, and the enemy twists that into, you don't belong here. You're separated, you're alone, you're powerless because you don't have that education. One of the biggest preparations for me these last 2 years is, working with a concert promoter. It's the business side of the music, but for the last 2 years, my primary role has been writing a database, something that has been developing an operations database, something I've never done before, but it turns out God is interested in it. He gave me creativity, and to the point that the database developers were saying, how did you do that? Oh, that's amazing. I'm going to change the way I'm doing it over here or whatever. But as I would ask the Lord how to do it, it gave me such a dependence on direction. That lack of education is a gift. It's almost like the Pharisees who were trapped by the law that was so good versus those who are just listening to the voice of God because they didn't know any better. Yeah. And I think that's what he's inviting us to, is just hear. You don't have to do it the same every time. Just hear his voice and respond.
Okay.
I think a big hurdle to get past is, like Lauren's just talking about, having that dream in your pocket and then your conversation backstage. That's a big place to get to, that I think is the key to sharing, is deciding within yourself that I'm going to start talking about this idea, or I'm going to start telling people this thing I've been working on. Because a lot of us have those things, even if it's 2 lines on a paper or that note you have in your phone. And then, in other words, that salsa trip next door wouldn't have turned into anything if you were still holding back when someone asks you point blank, like you were asked, hey, what are you up to? What do you like to do? What's your big dream? What do you do when you're not doing this? I asked that a lot when I was in the oil business, because I'm just tired of talking about sports and the weather. I can't do it anymore. And all of it was in Houston. So I can't talk about Houston sports, being a Dallas person my entire life. So I'm like, if he talks about the Astros, I'm going to take a hostage in this cocktail bar right now. So I would just try to get, hey, do you have kids? What are you doing when you're not doing this? And as soon as he said golf, I would try to get past golf, because I knew that was answer 1A, because you're in the oil business and that's the other part of your body is golf. So I'm just like, but I could have been asked that 100 times and just gone, oh, I coach my daughter's basketball team. And just, you can get the conversation over, you can get the conversation to be moved along. But when you have that decision, like, people ask me a lot about the sharing it part, and I feel like it's kind of more vague. And so sharing it could be texting an MP3 to a friend who's not even in the music business and just going, hey, this is what I've been working on. Tell me if you like it. Tell me what you think, man. Or just going, you know what? Okay, starting today, I'm willing to share what I'm working on with the guy at the grocery store or whoever asks me what's going on. I'm going to come up with like a 2-sentence, concise, almost elevator pitchy kind of thing that I think is cool. And then let's see what happens to it. And I think that's a big hurdle, because if it's in your back pocket, all those potential interactions and conversations will just get blown right by.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's so many facets of that. Is like, you're sharing it, your soul unintentionally comes alive. Like, you don't even realize it, but all of a sudden this oxygen is rushing in and you're starting to feel that way. And you're inviting others to be alive as well. You're saying, come on. And I've found so many people tell me, I want to be a part of this. I want to be engaged with this. One of the elements of experience redemption that is just true to the heart of this, that me, is so many times Christian outreach is an us and them type of presentation. It's like, come join our team, thing. And I understand sheep and the goats and all the Bible stories and all things about that. But to me, the redemption story is a we and him story, and about the love of a father for all of us. And combining that story has made me want to talk to somebody from traveling on a subway or whatever and say, hey, I'm trying to figure out a creative way to tell the redemption story. What's your thoughts on it? What do you feel, not about church? What do you feel about God? What keeps you away from it? What kind of story would draw you in? What would make you believe? What would, if you're just imagining looking at a stage and just inviting, I actually got that idea out of Save the Cat. I don't know if you've heard that, read that book.
Blake Snyder.
But it's like, you mean I don't have to have it all figured out and then present it to people? It's presenting it to people is how you get it figured out. And that's what makes things come alive.
Oh, I love it.
That's awesome.
Well, this has been great, man. Time has gone super fast. What's the best way for people to connect? I mean, you've shared the Instagram, you can share your Instagram handle again, but just any other ways, just to stay involved with what you're trying to do with the Redemption Project Experience Redemption. Is that what the official title is?
Yeah.
Okay.
All of it has yet to be developed. So I have Experience Redemption Project at gmail.com right now. It's Experience Redemption Project at Gmail. And my Instagram handle is Baby Hippogram. But my disclaimer is it's just a goofy thing that I just started doing. And so it is not this amazing thing that the artists you've had on here, engagement thing, but it just has more to do with this. If you visit it, you'll see it. It's just to me a celebration of what the enemy meant for bad has really been turned for good in a lot of ways.
Love it. Well, I'll put those in the show notes, and if there's something that the Lord moved your heart towards musicals or being involved in something like this, definitely reach out to Greg and just make connections and see what happens. I know we have a diverse audience, so you just never know, who's listening. And man, it was, regardless of what you're trying to create, I know it was encouraging for us and will be encouraging for our audience. So thank you, Greg.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks,
for the
Greg.
wonderful work you guys do. You are leading people into life.
It's encouraging.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, that means a lot. All right, guys. Well, as we've said, if you're enjoying the show, rate and review. That helps other people find it. And thanks for joining us. And we'll see you next time on Make It, Share It.
See you.
Bye.